Back in the late 2000s, I was walking around the electronics section of my local Target, and out of the corner of my eye, I spotted a new game from a series I was very familiar with. That game was Ratchet Clank Future: Tools of Destruction. I remember looking at it and being so disappointed I couldn't play it because I didn't have a PS3. Fast forward to Christmas of 2009, when I finally have one in hand, and along with it, one singular game featuring that iconic duo. But it wasn't Tools of Destruction. No, this was an even newer game, one I didn't even know about. So after everything was all hooked up, I popped in the disc and prepared to play. Little did I know what was in store. I don't believe there's such thing as a perfect game, but Ratchet & Clank Future: A Crack in Time comes pretty damn close. The moment I began playing, I knew I was in for a treat. For one, Dr. Nefarious was back, and at the time, that was actually a big deal. The last Ratchet game I had played and enjoyed before this was Up Your Arsenal. I didn't see that cameo in Deadlocked. I didn't know he was revealed at the end of Quest for Booty. It was the first time I'd seen him in about 5 years, which felt like an extremely long time back then, and I couldn't have been happier. Then there was all the new characters, and the story, and the radio. It was just some of the most fun I've ever had with a game, but I'm getting ahead of myself. First, let's take another step back and look at the development history. Following the success of Tools of Destruction, Insomniac Games aimed to design an ambitious sequel expanding the Ratchet & Clank series. Something innovative, but retaining all the qualities that made it enjoyable in the first place. The gameplay was mostly kept consistent with Tools of Destruction, but now included several key features themed around time. This allowed them to not only tell a new story, but also build new mechanics, which I'll explain later. In wanting to deliver a more engaging story, Insomniac took on the challenge of creating characters with which the audience would have an emotional connection, as well as crafting a cohesive narrative building upon established characters. And while this was great for exploring deeper themes, the game's short runtime unfortunately resulted in some of these new cast additions being underdeveloped. One might say Insomniac was biting off more than they could chew with this. While the final product delivered incredibly memorable moments and remains a significant entry in the series, such an idea proved to be quite demanding, leading to rushed production and much cut content. If you want a more comprehensive look into the development and what exactly was planned, I recommend this video by the Golden Bolt. Nevertheless, what we received still ended up being more than we could have hoped for at the time.
Ratchet & Clank Future: A Crack in Time is all about Ratchet's search for his friend Clank and how he must confront Dr. Nefarious, who is trying to use time for his own evil purposes.
A Crack in Time follows Ratchet's quest to find Clank, who has been captured by Dr. Nefarious and is being held in the Great Clock, a time-maintaining zony construct in the exact center of the universe, give or take 50 feet. As Clank learns about his origins, Ratchet teams up with fellow Lombax Alistair Azimuth and discovers Nefarious' plans to use the Great Clock for time manipulation. Ratchet and Clank eventually reunite, but Alistair becomes a threat, driven by his desire to save the Lombaxes and fix the mistake that got him exiled. After a climactic final battle, Alistair ultimately sacrifices himself to prevent the clock's destruction. The game concludes with the clock being repaired, and as the duo says their goodbyes, Clank realizes that his place is with Ratchet, and the two depart together, reinforcing their friendship.
I know a lot of people joke about the fact that, it feels like a Pixar movie, but it legitimately felt like a real Ratchet and Clank movie.
At the time, a Ratchet and Clank game with a story of this magnitude was unheard of. And it's not like it was even the most complex thing in the world, it was just so different. In the PS2 games, while there was a narrative present, it often felt fragmented, with stories confined to each game rather than an overarching plot. The Future Saga as a whole had this depth to its storytelling that made it stand out amongst previous titles, and it's one of the biggest reasons it's so fondly looked back on.
Something I don't feel like people talk about enough is how this game sort of deconstructs the idea of destiny. You have these characters who were born for these purposes, but at the end of the game, at the end of the story, they decide, no, we're not going to do that. Ratchet can just be Ratchet and Clank can just be Clank, and I really like that.
What I love about A Crack in Time story is that it gives the titular duo a chance to shine as individual characters, as well as how it explores the theme of father figures through both of them in such different ways. On Ratchet's side, you have his quest to find and reunite with the Lombaxes, which began in Tools of Destruction. This journey is significantly influenced by his interactions with Alistair Azimuth, an elder Lombax and a friend of his father, making him sort of like a long-lost uncle. And then you have Clank, who discovers that he's not simply a factory-built robot, but rather the son of a time god named Orvis. While this revelation understandably sparked some mixed reactions from fans, the dynamic was very well done, and I believe it did enrich Clank's character. Orvis comes across as a very caring father to Clank, and you can sense that he genuinely wants what's best for his son.
Azimuth is somebody who is completely obsessed with Destiny, but then you have Orvis, and what he does is he says, I created Clank, and he can do whatever he wants to do. That's what I care about as a father, and I think that's very beautiful.
Another thing I like about this game is that it actually features a villain you can feel bad for.
In contrast to Clank's bond with Orvis, Alistair is so consumed by his guilt that he often treats Ratchet as a means to an end in his desperate quest for personal redemption. It's unfortunate because he's the closest thing Ratchet has to family. Despite his good intentions, Alistair is too entangled in his own issues to fill that supportive paternal role, which ultimately leads him to become the true antagonist of the story. It really is a tragic situation, and you can't help but feel sympathy for him in the end.
I admit that the Future Saga did some things that were a bit strange to me. The change to a more serious tone on the PS3 was very jarring, but by A Crack in Time I realized that this was a direction the series needed to take.
I've noticed that many fans have started to turn on the Future Saga for its tonal shift over the years, citing it as a treachery to the PS2 era. I respectfully disagree.
While the departure from the themes of consumerism and satire found in the PS2 era was met with its share of criticism, many fans appreciated the change, as it was handled very well. During a time where darker and edgier content was becoming more prevalent in the gaming landscape, the essence of Ratchet & Clank remained intact, and it never felt like it was trying to be something that it wasn't. What, you were expecting me to talk more about Nefarious? About how this is him at his absolute best? I'll let these clips speak for themselves.
What's the matter, Lawrence? Chicken? Victory! In your face!
So what is it this time, Nefarious? You still trying to turn everyone into robots? Or is it just good old-fashioned galactic domination?
Part of me wants to let you live long enough to find out. The other part really wants to kill you. You know, for old time's sake. Decisions.
One thing that people will be impressed with is just the amount of variety we have in this game.
But if the story isn't enough, the gameplay of A Crack in Time is just as much of a highlight.
Now that Clank has time powers and is going on his own path in the story away from Ratchet, I remember actively looking forward to his sections for the first time ever.
Clank sections are definitely more fun to play than ever before.
Since this game sees the duo split up for a majority of the story, Clank segments play a bigger role than ever before. This time, instead of controlling an army of gadgetbots or escorting a monkey sidekick to distract enemies and get from place to place, Clank himself gets to step up, fighting enemies head-on with his Chronoscepter and solving intricately designed time-related puzzles. These challenges are so satisfying to figure out, and they remain my favorite Clank sections to date, rivaled only by the similar puzzles found in Rift Apart. Then there are the planet rooms, which involve time-fixing minigames. These are much more straightforward and fast-paced, and while arguably not essential, their rapid nature and simplicity allows for quick moments of respite from the brain-teasing temporal recording challenges.
In my opinion, Clank gameplay peaked here and never got better.
I like the Constructor weapon lineup. That was a pretty cool idea that I wish extended to the whole arsenal. Space exploration was also a pretty decent replacement for the loading screens of past games.
Now for Ratchet, you have your standard blend of platforming and shooting, but this time with a twist. First, there's the Constructo lineup, 3 unique weapons which can be customized to your liking. This includes changing the color, modifying triggers or payloads, and additional performance upgrades. Another major improvement over past games is hover boot traversal.
My god, the hover boots. The charge boots in previous games were kind of fun, but horrendously stiff, making them inconvenient most of the time.
With these, Ratchet can, quote, jet around all of the levels, hit ramps, bounce off walls, and do a lot of cool moves that gets him around the world quickly. But in my opinion, what truly elevates a Crack in Time is the open space exploration and combat. The ability to actually take control of a Aphelion and fly around to reach new destinations is an extraordinary aspect that hasn't been seen in the series since. Searching mini-moons for Zoni and engaging in battles with enemy ships form a core memory of my experience, and it absolutely embodies what I think of when I reminisce about the game.
Space travel, while not multi-dimensional, offered a nice change of pace as we traverse a more toy-like space environment. Also, space radio. Just space radio.
As you cruise through the cosmos, you'll have the option to listen to one of 4 radio stations: classical, jazz, electronica, and soft rock. This feature blew my mind. Some of this music is something I never expected to hear from Ratchet & Clank, and the feeling of roaming through a vast universe while being serenaded by these relaxing tunes is nothing short of magical. In addition to that, the radio also comes with its own news reports and commercials, which really make this whole universe feel that much more alive.
Does your VG9000 Omega Watt game station require modification? Are your cleaner bots still running an obsolete processing software? Then come on down for the grand reopening of Big Al's Robo Shack and Gaming Superstore, where the only limits are in your imagination!
One thing I can't stress enough about this game is the sense of freedom it offers. Even though it has its linear moments and still follows the basic formula, it stands out as something truly different from what came before it. It's the kind of game that encourages you to wander and take things at your own pace, without feeling pressured to get things done.
Ratchet & Clank: A Crack in Time is probably the highest point of the franchise for me.
It's one of the best games in the franchise, and it's by far my favorite game on the PlayStation 3.
Since its release in 2009, A Crack in Time has gone on to receive critical acclaim, with critics and fans alike calling it one of, if not the best game in the series. It knew how to play with your emotions in the best way possible. Maybe it's because I experienced it when it first came out, but it captured a beauty and magic that I feel is hard to replicate today.
I used to consider this my all-time favorite game of the franchise for many years, but after revisiting it, it has not aged well for me personally.
And now I think it's only fair to touch on the cons. I mentioned earlier that this is the closest I've come to viewing a game as perfect, but even I have my issues with it. Mostly when it comes to the repetitive enemy encounters, which make areas like the hangar of Vorsalon's ship or the Battle of Gimlick Valley really tedious and annoying. I've also heard people say the story has too many plot holes, how it jumped the shark introducing Orvis as Clank's father, and how it has a somewhat hypocritical message about the usage of the Great Clock as a time machine. However, perhaps the biggest criticism is the fact that the game doesn't actually involve as much time travel as it sets itself up to. Sure, there are parts that center around this mechanic, but they're few and far between, which can make the gameplay feel quite lacking in the long run. It wasn't until over a decade later that we would finally receive a game that leaned a lot more heavily into that aspect. That would of course be 2021's Rift Apart. From the premise of splitting up Ratchet and Clank early on before reuniting them, to Nefarious being the main villain, to both having some of the greatest Clank segments in the series, this is the easiest to compare to A Crack in Time in terms of both story and gameplay. As stated before, it also put a lot more focus on the concept of temporal and dimensional manipulation, more accurately capturing what its predecessor attempted to. But while Rift Apart excelled in that particular area, it did fall a little short when it came to the portrayal and prioritization of Ratchet and Clank themselves. Many fans view A Crack in Time as a fitting conclusion to the series and the friendship between the two characters, making their separation in this latest entry feel overall less impactful. It mainly serves as a plot device for introducing our new duo, Rivet and Kit, and although we do get a bit of closure to Ratchet's arc through his apprehension about finding the Lombaxes, the lack of emphasis on the titular protagonists is a bit disappointing. Not to mention the inability to free roam in space and the absence of that soothing radio music, but that's more of a personal gripe. Also, no Insomniac Museum? Sorry, didn't know where else to put this, but A Crack in Time's version of the Insomniac Museum is my absolute favorite. I just love zooming through the hallways and visiting Dan Johnson in this little outside area here. And who could forget the room with the giant cat poster that shoots lasers from its eyes?
Oh, what the hell?
I think that Ratchet & Clank A Crack in Time is a really great game. It's easily the most emotional Ratchet & Clank game, which I think is why so many fans hold it in such high regard. In a lot of ways, it works as a nice conclusion to the series, despite how it kept going. And it's a game that means a lot to me, and I think to a lot of other people too, which is just very, very cool.
To me, this game, and even the future saga itself, is an example of experimentation done right. Yes, it moved away from what it was, but did so in a way where it felt like a natural evolution for the series. It never strayed so far from its roots that it completely lost its identity. What's really sad is thinking we might never see something like this in the Ratchet & Clank series again. I know Rift Apart drew inspiration from it, with some people saying it's better in every single way, but for the reasons I mentioned previously, I just can't fully agree with that. Though it has succeeded in getting things back on track after some of the not-so-great entries.
A Crack in Time is genuinely about as perfect as the PS3 era of Ratchet got, and if the series ended here, I would have been perfectly fine with that.
It was a beautiful game, and it's one that I would love to play again on a more modern system and have more people experience it.
It's just one of those games where every time I think about it, I want to replay it. I miss the music, I miss wasting time in the Agorian Battleplex, I miss Sigmund and Borsalon. Yeah, I know I didn't exactly mention them at all in this video up until now, but they exist and I love them. And looking back on it, knowing what I know now about Insomniac's original vision and everything that was planned, I think, okay, maybe it could have done with some more time in the oven. But just like with something like Star Fox Adventures, it's impossible for me to dwell on the idea of wasted potential. All I can see is a game I loved then, and I still do now. Overall, A Crack in Time is perfectly imperfect, and I wouldn't change a thing. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and happy 15th anniversary to A Crack in Time. Once again, special thanks to everyone who participated and Blue Knight for editing. As always, don't forget to subscribe for more casual gaming content, and I will see you next time. Until then, this is Miharu, signing off.